In this video, you're going to learn how to work with arrays in GraphQL. This is going to allow us to exchange arrays back and forth with the GraphQL API. So maybe the client needs to send an array as one of the values for an operation argument, or maybe the server needs to send an array back as the response for a given operation. In either case, we can do just that using arrays. Now, to start off, we're going to explore how we can work with arrays of our scalar types. So an array of strings or an array of numbers. Then we're going to move on to a more real-world example and learn how we can work with arrays of our custom types. So an array of posts or an array of users. To kick things off, though, we are going to start with those scalar types. So let's set up a brand new query for that. Right here, we're going to set up a query for a grading application. We're going to call the operation grades, and we're going to set it up to return some array-based data. For an array type, we start off with square brackets, much like we would if we were creating an array in JavaScript itself. Now, after this, we can also choose to put an exclamation mark on there. That says we are always going to get an array back, even if it's an empty one. If we left that off, we could indeed get null back as a valid value for grades. I'm going to leave the exclamation mark on. So if there are no grades, we'll just send back an empty array. If there are grades, we'll send back an array of numbers. The next thing we have to do is actually specify the type for all of those array elements. So is it an array of strings, an array of integers, booleans, IDs, what? In this case, we are going to use an array of integers, where each integer represents the percent you got on a given exam, where a 10% would be really bad and a 99% would be very good. So right here, if we want an array of ints, we have to specify that scalar type right here, int. Now, in the case of this internal type, we can also choose to put an exclamation mark on or leave it off. If we leave it off, it's nullable, meaning that I could have an array where one of the elements is null. If I add it on, it is non-nullable, meaning that if there is an item in the array, it is always going to be an integer. So with this example, we're saying we're always going to get an array back, and if there are items, they are always going to be ints. It would still be valid to get back an empty array via this type definition. So now that we have the actual operation defined in our type defs, let's go ahead and set up the grades resolver down below. I'm going to put that right here after add and before me, though the order is not important. Grades. I will set up all of the arguments necessary for grades, even if I'm not going to use them. It's a good idea to get into this habit for all of your resolver functions. So I have parent. Next up, I have args. Then I have the context. Then I have info. And all we're going to do is return an array of numbers. So we can pick some numbers. We'll say that you got a 99 on the first exam, then you got cocky and didn't study, and then you got an 80, and then we'll say you got a 93 on the final one. So here we are returning an array with 3 integers as our 3 elements. Now we can actually test out this new operation. I am going to save index.js and create a new query over in GraphQL Playground. I'll put this in a new tab just to clean up the output, and we will set up the operation, a query. We are querying for grades, and that is it. We can now fire off this operation, and what do we get back? We get back an array of all of our grades. So we have our grades property with our array of those 3 integers sitting right inside. Now in this example, you'll notice that we didn't provide anything after the field itself. I just specified grades. What I did not do is provide a selection set using the curly braces like this, where I specify what I want from each grade. This is not something we can do for an array of scalar types, like an array of integers, an array of floats, or an array of strings. Specifying a selection set like that is only something we do for an array of custom types. So for example, in the demo API, we explored that when we wanted to get a posts array back, I had to specify which fields I wanted for each individual post. So with an array of custom types, you have to specify that selection set. With an array of scalar types, you can't. Now in this case, we are sending arrays from the server to the client. Let's see how we could do things in the other direction. And to explore this, what we're going to do is set up add to take an array of floats as opposed to specifying just 2 arguments. So we'll let the user add up as many numbers as they like, as many as they actually provide in that array. To start, I'm going to delete all of the old arguments we had in place. So we'll remove A and we'll remove B. Now we have emptied out the parentheses and we can define the one argument that add is actually going to take. I'll call this something like numbers, and this is going to be an array of all of the numbers that you want to have added up. So right here, for the type definition, we will have something very similar to what we had right here, though instead of an array of our ints, it will be an array of floats. So I specify my array. I'll put the exclamation mark back there, meaning that you have to provide the numbers argument. Then inside of there, it's an array of floats, so float with an exclamation mark. And there we go. We are now always going to get an array, and when there is an item in the array, we know that item is indeed going to be a float. With this in place, with our type definition actually changed, we can go ahead and use this new array argument down below in the resolver for add. So we can start by removing all of the existing code, and now we can actually look at args.numbers to figure out how many numbers we need to add up. Let's start by checking if there are actually any numbers to add. So we know there's going to be an array, but it might be an empty array. So we can use an if statement. If we're going to check args.numbers, which we know is going to be an array, and we're just going to look at its length property. If the length is indeed equal to 0, what are we going to do? I'm just going to return 0. So we'll say that if you don't add up any numbers, you're going to get 0 back. The next thing we want to do down below is run some code for when the number's length is not 0. So when there are actually array items to add. And for this, we're going to use the very popular, very common array reduce method. If you've never used reduce before, it's a handy array method for reducing an array to a single value. In this case, we are trying to reduce an array of numbers to just a single number. You can always learn more about it by Googling MDN reduce. That'll bring you over to the Mozilla Developer Network page for the array reduce method. We're going to go ahead and actually implement this right here. And for our purposes, let's say we have some sample data being passed in. Let's just say it's 1, 5, 10, and 2. So down below, what are we going to do? I am going to return a value. That value is going to be the value that comes back from calling args.numbers.reduce. So here we are just calling reduce on our array, sending the return value back as the return value for add. Now we have to provide a function to reduce, so we provide a single callback function right here, like we do for most of our array methods, such as for each, map, and others. And this gets called with 2 arguments. The first argument is called the accumulator, and the second argument is called current value. Now, if you have an array of a single item, that single item value is always going to be the return value for reduce. This callback function will actually never fire. It is only when we have at least 2 array items that this callback function comes into place. So the first time this function runs, it is going to have the accumulator value equal to the first item 1, and the current value will equal to the second item 5 in this case, and it's our job to reduce that to a single value by returning something. So in this case, we're trying to add numbers up, so I can return the accumulator with the value 1 plus the current value with the value 5, resulting in a return value of 6. Now, the next time this function runs, 6 is the accumulator, and we move on to the next item to get the new current value. So we have 6 as accumulator, and we would have 10 as current value. We add both of those up, and what do we get back? 16. So then the callback function runs another time with 16 as the accumulator and 2 as current value. We run that, and what do we get back? We get back 18, and that's exactly what we would get if we added all of these numbers up. Let's go ahead and actually test our work. So I'm going to save index.js, and we are going to call add over here. I'm going to remove my grades query. I will use the add query operation, and right away we're already getting an error saying we have not provided the argument that it expects, but it's referring to A and B. Let's refresh the schema to get the same error, but with the numbers argument. Now we can actually call that, passing in the correct arguments. So numbers is the only one we have. It is an array of numbers, so we will set up an array of numbers. I'm going to use the same numbers from the file 1, 5, 10, and 2. I go ahead and run that operation, and what do I get back? I get back 18. So in this example, we're actually sending an array from the client to the server, and now we've seen arrays going in both directions. So we can send array data either way, depending on the needs of our application. Now, in almost all cases, arrays are going to be the value that comes back from the server. It's not that common to be sending arrays from the client to the server, though it is indeed possible and sometimes necessary. That's actually where I'd like to stop for this one. Now, we haven't talked about arrays of custom types. That's because I'm breaking up our discussion of arrays into 2 videos, preventing this one from getting too long. So in this one, we explored arrays of our scalar types. In the next one, we'll explore arrays of custom types, and there'll be a challenge requiring you to use everything you've learned about arrays so far. I'm excited to get to that, so let's go ahead and jump right in.